Well, as we slowly exit that lockdown, the line that divides what is allowed and what isn't is getting thinner and thinner. Citizens arguing that disallowing some of our most prized freedoms infringes on democracy and freedom of speech. Even when restrictions were at their tightest, many left-wing protesters gathering in large crowds far away from the cities they reside in. And in the ultra-Orthodox communities, displays of religious events with crowds of hundreds and not a mask in sight. For those watching from the sidelines, it might look like an irresponsible risk to the health situation. From within these movements, they are fighting for everything they believe in, from the freedom of democracy to freedom of religion. On the other hand, someone has to enforce the law. Several videos have gone viral in the last weeks from several clashes between police and protesters, some claiming charges like police brutality, and the police responding by saying they are being put in an impossible situation. Here's a clip making its rounds on social media. Just a quick disclaimer, of course, the people depicted in these videos do not necessarily represent the entirety of their communities. There are many people with many opinions. Now let's break down this story with some of the people that represent these ideals. I want to welcome Rabbi Dov Halbertal, former head of the Office of Israel's Chief Rabbi, Tomer Shor, Hadash activist, and Micky Rosenfeld, Israel police spokesman. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, Rabbi, I want to start with you. When you see this clip, as I'm sure you have before, what is going through your mind?
I think that the police didn't react in a nice way in the place. It wasn't very clever the way they behaved. But on the other hand, I think those Haredim, I'm very sorry to say, disobeyed the law, as most of the Haredim are doing every day. I mean, there is here a clash. And that's the photo from this wedding, and that's what occurred to me. It's the first time in the history of Israel that we are in a clash, in a rebel, in between the Haredi community and the state. And it's the first time. And it brings a lot of hatred, a lot of anti-Semitism. And I think it even justifies the hatred and anti-Semitism, because I think that most of my community doesn't obey the law. And I think that the police is doing really nothing, almost nothing. They can enter to such a place, to such a wedding for 1 or 2 minutes, but they cannot, they're doing nothing against the hundreds of thousands of Haredim that disobey the law. Right. Like in this photo, for example. It's because the police is very political minded. It's not the police, it's Netanyahu, that he probably doesn't mind people to die here in Israel. I'm saying sharp things. He doesn't mind them to die because of his own benefit.
Right.
He needs
and I just want to say, like, obviously it's a very, very dramatic clip. The reason it did go viral and get so much attention is because, the level of blood that you could see in the clip and just how dramatic this encounter looks. Micky, I do want to throw...
But what matters is the deep problem, not only this wedding.
Absolutely. I do want to throw the next...
Very deep, very deep.
I do want to throw the next question to Micky. From the police perspective, what led to that level of violence? Could there have been less blood? I want to know, what are the biggest challenges in situations like these?
Well, in terms of the Israeli National Police, our units have been located and mobilized in different areas all across the different communities, not specifically the Haredi ultra-religious communities. Our aim and task is to implement laws and regulations of the Israeli government. Whatever decisions will be made are implemented on the ground by our units. Unfortunately, in that specific wedding that took place, the guests gathered illegally. More than 20 gathered in that area, so we know it was illegal to gather. And they immediately confronted the police officers that arrived at the scene. We've broken up many weddings where people understood that it was wrong, understood they were breaking health and safety regulations, and they shut down the weddings and left. Here in that specific family, unfortunately, the response was very, very aggressive towards police, including attacking police officers. Glass bottles were thrown. And one of our police officers, you have to understand, one of our police officers slipped on the floor with the same individual who was being arrested for attacking a police officer, and he got cut by glass on his lip. At the end of the day, he went to hospital, he had it stitched up. It was an unfortunate incident. It could have been, of course, not taken place, but due to the fact that there was a dramatic response from the individuals taking part in that wedding, our units had to make an arrest. We explained to them that what they're doing is against the laws and regulations, and Israeli police will continue trying to do everything to keep all of the different communities safe. And that includes breaking up weddings and breaking up illegal gatherings that have unfortunately taken place.
So it sounds like,
nothing actually against the most of the Haredi not obeying the law. You are doing nothing. Hundreds of thousands are disobeying and you are not in the place. Hasidut Belz and Hasid Nasharim, all the places. Where are you? You don't dare even to do something.
The Israeli
only with 20 people, that individual, that's all. You don't dare. You are very political minded.
I heard what you asked, and if you want me to answer, I'll answer your question. Thank you very much. What I can explain and what I can confirm is police activities are taking place, and it's very important that your members and your viewers know that, in all of the different areas, and I mentioned that before, both within inside the ultra-religious communities as well, within inside Jerusalem, inside Beitar Illit, inside Elad, inside Bnei Brak. And this is, in fact, if you look today specifically, why in Israel are there 5 different cities that are still under red closed zones? Because unfortunately, within inside the communities, they are not keeping the rules and regulations. And sadly, the majority of people that are not keeping the regulations today have been the ultra-religious communities.
You are doing nothing.
I haven't finished my sentence. I just want to finish my sentence. So obviously, there is a fundamental problem with implementing the laws, rules, and health and safety regulations of the Israeli government, which the Israeli police are implementing. I think that is the question that should be asked today. What is happening within that specific community, which unfortunately has resulted of thousands of people becoming ill, and unfortunately many people that are going to die as a result of the communities.
Okay, really fascinating, gentlemen. Thank you for that. I just want to bring Tomer into the conversation. I do want to bring in, the left-wing protesters to this discussion. Tomer, you've been to a lot of protests. I want to know, have those protests been relatively peaceful? And, during the lockdown, did you feel like the police were stopping you from exercising your democratic right?
Well, I feel the protests have been peaceful to the extent the police allow them to be peaceful. We've seen that before Corona. We've seen that all over protests in recent history. Protesters, especially nowadays, are only interested in expressing the democratic rights and expressing the views on the government in this current situation. And the cops are really being dealt an impossible task. They're being tasked by the government to break down dissent and break down discontent and break down the protest. And they've done that with repeatedly escalating violence. No one in the streets is interested in fighting the cops. We're not into that. We just want to express ourselves. We've seen police kettling protesters. We've seen police bringing water tanks and cavalry towards protesters who don't do anything besides chant and express their views. And the police are really out there exercising the will of the ruling class, the political will of the government. And it's an impossible task because you cannot break down the spirit of the protest. And as long as they're going to try and break us down, we're going to see escalating violence because there's really no way of handling that.
Micky, it seems like a lot of the blame for a lot of the violence that has broken out, during these events is going to the police rather than the government, to the police who are just enforcing the laws of the government. I'm curious, what do you do when your personal values or opinions don't necessarily align with what the government is asking you to do in these situations?
Well, first of all, I want to confirm in terms of the Israeli National Police an important point about the protests. And I think it's important that the viewers understand that as well. The Israeli National Police are implementing the laws and the regulations, and we are there in order to allow people to have the democratic rights and protest. That is why we made security, health, and safety measures. As long as people are keeping the health and safety measures, keeping social distancing, wearing the masks, which are absolutely vital to stay safe, we are allowing those protests to take place. In the Balfour area, there are specific hours where people are allowed to make the noises and protest, but there is a certain point where at the end of the evening, the demonstrations have to finish and have to end. And what happens is the Israeli National Police have called time and time again to those protesters. The majority of people, as Tomer said, are protesting there in peace and quiet and have left. But unfortunately, there's always a small group, and it's difficult for me to tell you whether it's 5 or 8 or 10%, but they are unfortunately there in order to confront the Israeli police. And then the Israeli police respond and react exactly according to what takes place on the ground. When people are not going to leave the area, so we ask them to leave the area, and then eventually we remove them. When police are attacked and confronted, then if necessary, we do use force in order to make those arrests and look for those specific troublemakers. But what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, in fact, has been relatively calm and relatively quiet gatherings and protests that have taken place. And therefore, as we've seen over the last Saturday evening and one before even, there were no major incidents that took place. If we make 3 or 5 arrests out of 10,000, that's absolutely very good in terms of both the protesters, in terms of both the Israeli National Police. And that is the policy which is being implemented. The Israeli police have no say. The Israeli police are implementing the laws and regulations of the government.
Can I address that, please?
Of course, go ahead.
First of all, the health concerns. It's really admirable the way the police are claiming to care for health concerns, but what I've seen, and what most protesters have seen, is the overwhelming majority of protesters keeping health regulations, social distancing, wearing masks, and the cops are those without masks, who are not social distancing, who are getting in your face, trying to provoke you and get a response out of you, so they have an excuse to exercise violence over you. And regarding the second thing you brought up, which is the relative peace and calm, well, I just last week got an illegal ticket at 8 p.m. before the police dispersed the protest. We're seeing special task forces which are dedicated to organizing crime, stalking protesters. We've seen detectives visited the house of people who have been illegally sent to house arrest just to check on them. And we're seeing really scare tactics being exercised by police, trying to crush the spirit of...
I really think we could go on and discuss this probably for the next 10 hours. It's so interesting, but unfortunately we have to cut it off here. Rabbi Halbertal, Micky Rosenfeld, and Tomer Shor, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.